Hey guys, Vinnie Mirchandani again. This pleasure to have today Tamas Hevizi. He is the head of private equity at Automation Anywhere, and we're going to be talking about three fairly interesting topics today about automation, all kinds of robotic process automation and other automation. Second, has he's had a lifetime of experience with value realization. So in this interesting environment, how do you justify technology? Where's the value? And then the third thing, because he's been in private equity so long, we'll be talking a little bit about trends in private equity. So Tamas, welcome on board. Why don't you give us a quick overview of your background, and then we can jump into the conversation.
Vinny, very nice to see you. And I think it's a very timely topic talking about uh, the value of technology. So I spent pretty much most of my career focused on various aspects of value creation with technology. I started in my 90s in management consulting, doing when reengineering was hot, if you remember.
Yeah,
Michael Hammer was still around. So a lot of the discovery was around how do we drive value with early technologies, ERP, but just in general consolidation. That was like pre-outsourcing even. And then spent my last 20 years in enterprise software. In most of my roles, I was either developing business cases for about 10 years and then working with private equity firms for the last 10 of those years. And I think it's the way I think about my background is I focus on value creation as much as possible with technology. And as you well know, there are challenges, pros and cons of what technology can bring to bear.
great. But Tamas, let's we've been seeing a lot of heroics in automation and acrobatics, right? So in healthcare, all kinds of heroics. Uh, Acrobatics in that auto companies are jumping into medical ventilators, banks are having to scale up to handle hundreds of billions in emergency loans and so on. Um, Surely it's taken a lot of automation to support those kind of acrobatics. Give me some examples of what you've seen from an automation perspective.
Happy to, Vinny. It's probably worthwhile to just take one step back because a lot of times people look at automation or RPA saying this new technology. If I'd like to look at automation as a continuum, I mean, we've had automation probably for the last 15, 20 years. And there were
Industrial revolution, right? 200 years.
yeah, maybe as long as technology existed, right? So it's an evolution, and I think I mean all the way back from scripting and macros and screen scraping, right? So I think for those in your audience that hasn't thought about much about automation, I think what changed in the last couple of years is the skill set of automation. As much as we think about Alexa skills and Siri skills, in many ways, automation of the platform acquires a lot of skills. And I think what's recently changed is a lot of the AI and machine learning algorithms made their way into the automation toolkits, whether it's ours or others. And that enables IT organizations, but even the businesses, to automate tasks that they just simply couldn't with scripts. And and pre-COVID even, a lot of the automation made their way into intelligent document processing, like making sense of documents we all see, which is actually a huge area in automation in general. If you think about it, we all know OCR. Like OCR always got us to about 40% because it was basically capturing the data on the screen, but didn't have the context for it, right? And I think various tools in intelligent document processing or cognitive RPA, as I think about it, got to that last mile, is finishing it up. So you can actually have straight through processing of maybe 90-95% of documents, whereas traditional OCR, whichever tool you use, it probably stuck around 40%. And why that matters in normal times, because until you get to that level of straight through processing, you actually cannot free up that workforce to do something else. So you actually tying up a lot of your workforce in menial tasks. And I think that capability of processing documents, like I said, 95% is a big deal, 90% straight through processing of just documents across industries has a tremendous impact. Now put that in the context of COVID, right? So where are the most of the disruptions happening? There's a lot of documents moving. So healthcare, clearly. So everything from patient registration. So you have just an influx of patient inquiries, registrations that actually always had a manual step somewhere in between. Maybe there was a questionnaire, but somebody somewhere took that form, maybe a call center. Same way with obviously loan applications. So I'm leaving SBA out right now because right now the bots are not that popular in that sector. But what's happening in general is the volume of documents or input increased tremendously, and that's where not just automation but specifically computer vision or document processing played a key role. We could finish that last steps. And you asked for something specific. So in many ways, a lot of us interact with, let's say we interact with chatbots, or we interact with some kind of a website, right? In patient registration, loan application. So the front end has always been done, but the back end systems are breaking. I think many of us follow the news where the big loan application systems are breaking down. So a lot of the heroics.
Unemployment sites, state unemployment, another one, yeah.
So we're seeing just in crisis related, we're seeing automation just handle that overflow. So in the olden days, maybe 10, 20 years ago, we would have thrown a lot of people at these problems, just put people in place and handle the excess capacity. Now a lot of companies are saying, can we throw bots at it? And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So I'm not painting a picture where saying all problems can be solved by automation. But like I said, because that cognitive gap, or just call it computer vision, just recognizing documents has advanced so much, we're at a point where handwriting can be recognized, and a lot of that is open source. And Azure has a great handwriting recognition, so hat tip to Microsoft. But there's a lot of other advancements in AI, so that allows a lot of the document-driven processes to be closed, and that's a big deal. We're just give you a sense. So in healthcare, we're seeing even pre-crisis, but right in the crisis, probably about 20-30% of tasks, just steps people perform, can be automated with the current technology. And that probably was 10% even 2 years ago. And like I said, the advancement is not actually in RPA so much as it is in the computer vision document recognition segment. So I think it has been a continuum, and I think a crisis, I believe, hit at a time where, and there are other tools. I just want to, again, another head tip. So there's a parallel development in process discovery, process mining that actually helps companies with preparing for automation in the crisis. So because many times companies don't actually know what they're doing, right? So they don't know what exactly the processes they have. They may not have done a full analysis. So they can do some basic discovery in the processes and then feed an automation effort. Or what we're seeing in our business is a spot solution, just fix problems that are as they're emerging pretty quickly.
That's exciting. And as we become more hygiene conscious, more voice interfaces, more gestural interfaces, which will need more machine support, right? So yeah, that's exciting to hear. Let's switch a little bit to your lifetime of value quantification, value realization, and so on. We're entering a recession, maybe short or maybe long, we don't know, but that's when CIOs start to get more cautious. So the value point becomes even more important, right? So tell us, you've done a lot of work at SAP and now you're continuing to do it. Tell us, where has it been successful and where have you seen people not really, they go in and talk value, but then they can't really show it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a long time search for me. As I said in the introduction, I spent pretty much the last 20 years thinking about value creation. In context, I think it's interesting to think about the fact that if you look at a business 20 years ago in the same industry and today, their P&L sort of looks the same. So as we think about all the ERP wave and all this CRM and other technologies that were introduced, outsourcing, everything else, a company that had an SG&A of, let's say, 30% probably still has an SG&A of about 30%. Well, what happened is the cost structure got reallocated to a lot of innovation. So what changed is And it's truly interesting because when I looked at that data, is it's not like companies that after waves of IT projects, they actually achieved from 30% to 10% SG&A. It didn't happen. What happened is the capital, truly the capital that got freed up, which has always been an argument in IT, got redeployed and made the businesses competitive. So it's a core belief I have because I looked at some of the data. But specifically, interesting thing that I spent a lot of times thinking about value creation elements. What are the levers? And because of who I work with, private equity firms, they have a thesis. They say, what can we possibly do with suppliers? So how much more can we reduce supply chain costs? How much can we reduce transportation costs? And what we realized, it's sort of the opportunities still remain. You can still, we work, I mean, I've looked at this for, as long as I remember, for example, in supply chain, we always said, we can always take another 10% out. If you talk to a purchasing manager, say, I can always take 10% out. You can always negotiate with your suppliers. Then the systems add maybe another 10% in efficiency. And I think what changed over time, Vinny, is what you needed with an SRM system 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you just didn't have the basics down. Now you're seeing machine learning. So the argument, for example, 10 years ago was just have an end-to-end system that had contract compliance. That was the big deal. Most of the companies weren't buying on contracts. So fixing contract compliance 10, 15 years ago gave you a tremendous, maybe 10, 15% reduction in supply chain costs. Now you're seeing a whole different element, which is getting you into that much touted supplier performance driven management. So you can actually deploy machine learning today, and you can actually analyze how the suppliers are performing, not just three-way matching on delivery, but you actually not just delivery performance, on-time performance, but you can actually predict how they're performing in their supply chain and use that information, as many companies would, in ratcheting your terms. So if the supplier is not performing well, now you have better data, which you didn't have 5, 10 years ago. And a lot of them actually didn't come out of ERP many times. And not to dwell on the crisis, but one of the amazing things we're seeing right now is in acrobatics, and I know you like that term, is we have ERP systems and companies are sitting there saying, I placed an order, the ERP system processed the order, it got sent out to suppliers confirmed it, the whole thing is supposed to be working, but it's broken. I know, they know, this is not going to be on-time delivery. So what are the kinds of systems? This is what I would encourage CIOs to think about in terms of machine learning, automation clearly, but there's others that I could deploy to reduce my supply chain risk. Not necessarily product risk, or provenance. I'm just talking about supply chain risk of predicting where things will break. And that's sort of, I believe, another 10, 15%, because expediting happens because things break. Off-contract buying happens because things break. I mean, throughout history. So if you root cause analysis, it ultimately had to do with the fact that you could not count on supply chain delivering as programmed in a way, right? So I'm still seeing I'm seeing business cases still today, 10, 20% additional improvement in transportation costs and supply chain costs, depending on the industry. Manufacturing can't get that deep, but depending on the industry, they're less efficient. You can still cut that, but the tools are different. The tools are getting into more predictive analytics, machine learning,
or even quantifying what used to be soft, right? So SAP with Qualtrics is quantifying experience. I mean, 10 years ago, we couldn't do that. So yeah, you make a good point that we are able to go much deeper, much more nuanced analysis of performance.
And I'm seeing this, by the way, not just on the supply side, I'm seeing the same thing on the sales side. And sales has always been elusive, right? Sales effectiveness and what tools you can use, how much can CRM move the needle. I don't even want to open that discussion up.
How much entertainment expense results in
that's hard. However, same kind of things I'm seeing in general, but in this context right now is customers are really trying to figure out better forecasting. The forecast accuracy game has been a discussion as long as we've been in IT, but now they're saying I can actually. So we work with companies that actually the bots they use are actually helping them maintain two sets of forecasts. But the forecasting algorithm are actually predictive analytics and machine learning that they use to say, I'm seeing patterns in my customer base. They're placing an order, they're going to cancel it. The returns are different. So there's a whole different dynamics around predicting the demand, but also there's different dynamics on depending on the industry, like healthcare. Specific example. So something I've never seen is a medical supply or pharma's rationing inventory, right? They never had to do it. There is no. I implemented some of them in my SAP days. There's no rationing function in order management in those systems. So they want to determine how they can fulfill orders partially without, to your point, experience management, without upsetting the customers. And you can do that based on surveys, but in this crisis, what they're basically doing is monitoring response. Do I get an inbound email? Do I get this? Do I get that? And use that information to stratify your customers differently. Who's a more patient customer? Who's not? And I think when people think about, I truly understand, because day in day out, I have 5 calls a day. Think about business continuity planning and what can we do and how much can we pressure suppliers? Can the bots just push out terms to suppliers, supplier communication, customer communication? But at the end of the day, I think this is actually a time for CIOs to think about how do I connect a couple of dots around predictive analytics or machine learning. A lot of these tools are not esoteric anymore. My underlying ERP system, like how do I reprogram the terms in the system? So let me give you specific examples. One of the scenarios in this crisis, very specific, is looking at I have a supply disruption. So based on the supply disruption, I'm anticipating based on how my 3PL provider tells me, I have 2 days delays already from China. What do I do? Do I reroute that order? Maybe I'm going to say I'm going to reroute that order to my Philippines operation because it's not going to get in time to the US. And I'm going to place a different order to a different supplier that I observed can perform better. Now, you can make that decision based on analytics, but the underlying ERP system is already a go. So you're going to need a tool, and customers use automation or RPA for it, to go back and recode your ERP system, change the original order, change based on events that you're noticing. These bridges are being built as we speak in the middle of crisis.
So it's certainly come a long way from the early days of value realization at SAP, right? Much more nuanced, much cross-functional value and so on. Actually, across the supply chain value analysis. Let's talk about your industry, private equity. Clearly, it seems a lot of money on the sidelines. So it seems like private equity is actually pretty healthy. But give me that's my external perspective. Give me your perspective on what subtle changes are taking place in your industry.
Yeah, so I've been supporting private equity firms for the last 15 years. So it's interesting to look at the industry for 2 minutes. So private equity, in earnest, got into operational involvement, working with their portfolio companies on a variety of initiatives back in like 2008 at the last crisis. And crisis does a lot of great things in terms of the agility of the investment industry, I believe. So in 08, 09, a lot of the firms formed operating groups, which is basically experienced former CEOs or CXOs getting involved and helping companies get more efficient. And what happened at the last crisis is private equity developed a new playbook. The old playbook was what they called margin expansion, or it basically leverage buyout. You're buying things on debt. And that's naturally, it's like buying a house for 10% down. It's naturally going to amplify your upside. What changed in the last crisis is they got involved in, okay, we're going to drive certain operational initiatives like leverage procurement. We're going to buy across the portfolio. So we talked about procurement or supply chain improvement. I can do that because I have the scale. So firms like a Blackstone, which is probably one of the leaders in that, they could use their scale and buying powers and billions of dollars of purchases to drive cost across the portfolio. So there were the early efforts. Then private equity in the playbook got into digital, but primarily on commerce. So several firms got into like Apex, Vista, and AG and others got into using digital and a model saying we're going to introduce commerce, or we're going to introduce some common platforms in the portfolio. So whenever a portfolio company wants to deploy an IT platform, we're going to have a playbook. And they're going to deploy it in a front end, they're going to deploy some common ERP, and that IT simplicity they believed could drive not only keep IT costs low, but overall improve the efficiency of the business. So that was probably the playbook for the last couple of years, and beyond that, they used advisors to help with strategy. In this crisis, I'm seeing the playbook shift again or expand again. This is the first time, probably started last year, private equity started thinking about AI in earnest in the context of if I use AI and machine learning, can I make the business more effective, more intelligence, and can I increase top line growth? Now they started doing this for a different reason, and the reason, Vinny, was because valuations were sky high. So if you're an investor and you're trying to bid on a business, and you say, I can't figure out how to make how this business can be worth so much. You're looking for a lot of tools, and the tools now are primarily IT tools. So what can AI can help? Where can machine learning help? Where can automation help? So you're seeing a lot of these new tools added to the operating playbook in private equity to help with the last edge, which I believe is going to continue post crisis. Now that playbook was put on hold in the middle of COVID. And the firms, the good news with private equity, the firms have a lot of experience dealing with crisis and disruption. A lot of their companies, because of the debt load they carry, they keep running into, they can run into issues. If demand drops, they may violate covenants, loan covenants. So the PE firms are very familiar with how to deal with crisis and disruption. But this is the first time I'm seeing, and I'm working with several firms on they run the playbook, procurement, contracts, renegotiating suppliers, paying attention to the customers. I'm seeing technology being deployed, predictive analytics around customers. How do I predict demand? Because I don't know where the demand is going to be, and I want to be right in my adjustment plans. This is the first time I'm seeing, obviously, automation being, like bots being thrown at the problem versus people. First time I'm seeing firms in the last crisis, what happened, a lot of times outsourcing firms came to the PE firms and saying, hey, listen, we're going to write you a check and we're going to take over the HR function of this company. We're going to take over IT function of this company. This is the first time firms are saying, okay, we may want to do that, but we want to couple that with automation, for example. We may want to couple that with cloud migration. There are two big trends that wasn't in the playbook. So I'm seeing one obviously that is my focus is automation. So sometimes they're saying we want to keep this operation on our systems, but we're going to deploy bots instead of outsourcing it. There are many reasons. One of this outsourcing got disrupted in the current crisis as well. But the second thing is cloud migration in general. There's I mean, can't believe there are still companies that are debating whether to go to cloud or not. But I'm seeing banks now talking about cloud migration, which never happened until now, or financial services company that private equity owns. So I think the playbook is changing, and I think PE is going to come across with a much richer ways to help their companies, which I think is going to benefit everybody. I believe, and I can say this because I work with PE firms all day long, but I believe private equity has become a very sophisticated partner for the companies they invest in probably in the last 10 years, and it's going to continue. So instead of just being a passive investor, now they're really thoughtful about how to engage with the companies, and that's probably going to benefit everybody because private equity is not a lender of last resort, but private equity is a buyer of last resort. So companies that are struggling right now with immense liquidity, I actually, just stepping back as a trained economist, not practicing one, is this is going to help the U.S. economy definitely, and part of Europe, is that private equity can actually come in and help companies that are really struggling right now because there's immense capital on the sidelines.
Tamas, as you were talking about, PE becoming much more technologically savvy. A thing I'm hearing from a number of CIOs is, for the last 10 years, we've said every company is becoming a technology company, right? Because they're embedding sensors and products and everything is going digital. I'm starting to hear that every company is going to be a healthcare company. Huh. They're seeing opportunities in healthcare. They're seeing the impact of healthcare on their employees. And they're saying it's too big a area for us to not have an executive at the board level. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing healthcare become more of a focus for private equity?
So healthcare has always been a focus for private equity. Just the U.S., I can speak to the U.S. because 23% of GDP, right? So healthcare was, a sector for private equity for a long time. And healthcare is just such an endless definition. But with med devices, a lot of life sciences, definitely in healthcare providers, Almost every RCM, basically the billing company, medical billing industry, was private equity sponsored or funded. And I think I mean, it's an industry that's ripe for efficiencies, and we've always known this. And the pressures are multiple. One is in my line of work, the most amount of manual work is actually in healthcare. Just rows and rows of people doing stuff or outsourcing. A lot of them is actually massively outsourced, but you just basically have a lot of manual activities, and it has two problems. One problem is it's drudgery, but that may be fine. But the second problem is what I think is real issue is agility. If you, as we noticed in this crisis, if your company is extremely manual, your ability to turn on a dime
Right.
doesn't exist. So I'm seeing private equity use that as a thesis, saying, and I can make these businesses obviously more cost efficient. Let's be honest, that's part of the thesis. But part of that is how do I make them more agile? How do I
Right.
make cycle times? We're seeing a lot of metrics that I haven't seen. Like half of our business cases have a component about DSO, for example, in healthcare billing. Right, it's all collections. So that is as important for them as cost efficiency. So I'm seeing a lot of shift. I have not seen a massive reallocation of capital to healthcare yet in private equity, but they may have that will take time because they're not setting those objectives. Those objectives set by their own investors, their LPs, the pension funds, and others. So there's macroeconomic reasons why a certain percentage of your equity is invested in healthcare beyond the opportunity. So I haven't seen a massive shift yet, but the economy is if the economy is going to have a bigger part in healthcare, private equity will have a bigger part in healthcare.
Great. Any final thoughts, Thomas?
Just one final thought is reflecting on value creation. I think I think we have a huge opportunity as an IT industry, and I consider myself obviously a part of the IT industry. Is we have the opportunity to make the value business cases and value creation plans real. A lot, and I don't mean this negatively. I just mean that many times I believed we as an industry put together a plan for how much value we can impact for the business, and it was a check the box, and nobody was actually monitoring. I actually believe that many times we were very well thought out, but it was not something that was being monitored. Assuming that this is going to be somewhat of a drawn out transition to whatever is the new normal are going to be, I think, and I'm seeing a lot of IT leaders that step up saying, I'm going to actually measure things. One of the titles, and my brother holds it, so I can say this is a digital value creation. VP of Digital Value Creation, VP of Value Creation. These are new titles that are emerging in IT, and I think that's something to think about because we shouldn't rely on the McKinseys and the others of the world to do value creation programs. I think that should be inherently something IT needs to do. And as you know, I mean, this goes up and down. IT used to have these focus, then it goes away, then it comes back, and I think. I think this would be something that I think is worth investing. Business will hold back investment from IT unless IT steps up and shows tangible, bankable results.
Well, that's a novel concept, auditing your promises from 3 years ago. But it happens in other areas. Might as well, it should be happening in value creation. So, Thomas, thank you so much. Really interesting. All three topics you touched on are very needed right now. So, thank you very much.
Vinny, nice to see you.